Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Ecclesiastical Law Bite-Size number 7, where this evening we're welcoming Father Chris Smith, who's going to help us think about what is an incumbent. Father Chris, would you like to just introduce yourself before I get into asking the questions?
Yes, of course. Father Christopher Smith, and I'm the vicar of St Albans, Holborn, in central London. And I've been here for, well, it'll be 14 years in May. I came here just in time to miss the old-fashioned freehold, which I had when I was vicar of St Michael's, Beckenham before in Rochester Diocese. And before that, I'd done a couple of years as chaplain to the Bishop of Horsham. And before that, I served my title in Wantage in Oxfordshire. That's me. Trained at St Stephen's House. I don't need to go any further back, I
No,
don't think.
no,
So,
indeed. So thank you for that. That gives people a picture, and you're, like me, a sort of jobbing priest as opposed to a highly trained ecclesiastical lawyer. But we like those of us who are actually working the law talking on this so that people can get the reality rather than just the theory, although you have got your LLM. So,
I'm highly trained in as much that I got the Cardiff LLM, which
yes,
is now closed, I see.
yes. Oh, well, it will resurrect, I'm sure, in some form or
Yes,
other.
I think it will.
Anyhow, so this evening we're thinking about what is an incumbent. So, what is an incumbent?
Well, it's the definitions question, isn't it, really?
Yes.
Incumbent as in recumbent. When you're recumbent, you're lying down. And an incumbency is something that's laid on you. It's a duty that is laid on you. I mean, same. Etymologically, we get incubate as well, but that's perhaps less helpful, really. But the obligation that's laid, the duty that's laid on a priest, is our incumbency. And so, an incumbent will be the occupant of a benefice, and a benefice brings with it a living. And we're paid a living so that we don't have to make tents like St Paul. Uh, but these are pre-Reformation terms, and the benefice. Roman soldiers, I think, were given a benefice, granted on condition that they would perform their military service. So, the terminology goes back a long way, but an incumbency is this duty that is laid upon us as incumbents.
So, what training would be needed to be an incumbent?
Well, more than we get, I think. I have a bit of a I have a I mean your real training to be an incumbent is what you do with your training incumbent when you're a curate. Uh, it seems to me. Now, look, you're an archdeacon. You may take issue with that, but I've got this funny feeling that we are we're not really trained for our first incumbencies. We start out as parishioners. In all probability, we start out as parishioners in perhaps reasonably successful parishes. We do placements in reasonably successful parishes. We serve our title in a reasonably successful parish, and then we become incumbent of somewhere where there are 20 people if we're lucky, and no money. And who trains you for that? So I do wonder. Look at what's or I can't speak for the Diocese of Southwark Moira, but look at what's on offer in most dioceses' training program, and ministry with bad backs, or I mean, it's just it's of no real utility, I think. So I think we should. I think we could do better, really, as a Church of England on that. But the thing to get right, and you will know this, I guess, from placing curates, is that curate incumbent relationship. I think that's where you learn the tricks of the trade,
So, people have had a theology training in college, and then the
which is
practical,
necessary and important.
in a sense, apprenticeship, and then they go into this first incumbency. But how is someone actually appointed? How is this incumbency laid upon them?
Well, that of course, it seems to me that we're still running two systems, really. So some jobs will pop up in the Church Times, And in other appointments that bishops need to make, they fish for an incumbent, don't they? Now, there may be less of that nowadays, but I still think there's something a bit odd about the fact that we run those two systems, and the fact that that whatever route that goes through, people's experience of coming to this point is very different. I think what a panel looks like in different places and in different contexts. So there's that other interesting thing a lot of clergy have almost never had a job interview. You know, so that I think that can be a bit of a shock at the point of depending on how your curacy sort of evolved. Get to the point of applying for an incumbency, and you may never have actually had an interview.
It is a strange discernment process where,
Yeah,
because parishes can look at more than one person at once, and although legally it's the patron trying to decide who they're going to present to the bishop, in
yeah,
practice today, the parish reps have quite a significant role, and they can look at several people at once, and yet each of these people have to say that before God they discern this is where God's calling them,
yes,
knowing that if they get shortlisted, there's a reasonable chance that they're going to be told it's not.
yes,
It does just make for a strange old system. Anyhow, so we've got our priest who's done their training, their curacy. They've managed to negotiate this strange process and been presented to the bishop. They've been installed by an archdeacon, which very ancient term comes from us putting people in their stall. What do they have to do legally once they're the incumbent?
Well, now, I had a funny feeling you were going to ask me that. So I dug out my copy of the Canons of the Church of England, and nobody younger than me will ever have seen this two-ring binder, I shouldn't think. Uh, uh, but it's all in Canon C24. And Canon C24 is quite sensible. And it talks about the requirement for us to say morning and evening prayer and the litany. Maybe we'll come back to the litany, or maybe we won't. It talks about presiding at Holy Communion on Sundays and feast days and Ash Wednesday. It talks about administering the sacraments and rites. It talks about preaching or making sure somebody preaches. It talks about the instruction of children, and in the modern iteration of this canon, being in school. It talks about preparing people for confirmation. It talks about visiting the sick and the infirm, and giving counsel. What's the phrase? He shall provide opportunities whereby any of his parishioners may resort unto him for spiritual counsel and advice. It talks about consulting together with the PCC on matters of general concern and importance to the parish. And it talks about the fact that basically, if you're not going to be there, you have to provide cover. Interestingly, I think quite a lot of clergy nowadays think that the rural dean is supposed to provide cover, but no, we are supposed to provide cover. So that's the Canon C24 definition of what an incumbent has to do, and that is what we do. Probably apart from the public recitation of the litany, but everything else there will chime with anybody. I mean, if anybody fancies a bit of entertainment, you might prosecute me under the clergy discipline measure for not saying the litany in public, but I'm not sure it would run. But that list of things is pretty much is pretty good. So I suppose then is that the reality? Well, it's not the reality because it's not exhaustive. We do all those things, but then as an incumbent, there is the reality of keeping the roof on. I mean, as a church commissioner, I'm always sort of amazed by the number of people who think there's a magic porridge pot of money out there to pay for everything. But as everybody on this call will know, we have to raise the money to keep the roof on, and it's hard. And the requirements of modern bureaucracy are hard. And these things do eat into our time. I was thinking about it, and there's been a change in the way funeral fees are collected, hasn't there? So nowadays the treasurer is supposed to do it, but of course the treasurer can't do it unless we give them the information. So we've still got to, do all the work apart from write the blinking check and put it in the post. It does make me laugh, really. Well, it does, makes me tear my hair out. Um, so, uh, so there is a lot of stuff that sometimes seems to get in the way of what I think, feel is at the heart of the matter. Uh, but I've also got another couple of ways of looking at life. If that shall I
Please
carry
do.
on wittering?
Yeah.
Is that all right? I think sometimes when you go into school and kids say, "Well, what do you do? What do you do all day?" Oh God, what do I do all day? And I think there are sort of three categories of things. There's the stuff that we do in the context of our regular churchgoers. There's the stuff we do in relation to people in the parish who are not necessarily churchgoers, and organisations and institutions and other things in the parish that we do. And that, part of that relates to mission, part of it relates to occasional offices, part of it relates to just being the incumbent, being the vicar, being the priest in the place. And then my sort of third category of things are the portfolio of wider things that we do, being a trustee of the Ecclesiastical Law Society, being on Diocesan Synod, General Synod, Church Commissioners, Board of Education, those sorts of things that we do to contribute to the life of the church beyond the boundaries. And I often think there's a sort of, how do you get the balance of that right? I sometimes think, how would I have found time to have been a church commissioner had I not had curates? So that we've all got to get that balance right. But I do think it's important for us to make a contribution to life beyond the boundary of the parish. So that's my little way of looking at that. But I also have a perspective which was given to me by my last curate, but two, whose father and grandfather had been small businessmen. Father Guy's grandfather had set up a small business, and his dad had inherited it. And Father Guy had a very sort of sanguine way of looking at the business of the bog in the center is blocked and needs unblocking, or an infinite number of things that you might be able to think of, which is that if you run a little business, it all falls on your shoulders, and you have to do it, and you have to do all those things, or cause them to be done somehow or other. And that's the way you make your business work. And I do sometimes take comfort in that model, which sometimes helps me when I'm otherwise tempted to grizzle about shifting furniture or whatever it might be.
So an honest job description is do what needs doing.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the difference then between someone who's formally the incumbent and someone who is a priest in charge?
Oh, Lord. Now, that would have been an obvious thing for me to have looked up before we had this conversation, doesn't it? You're an archdeacon, you tell us. I could have told you that before common tenure, but I'm not entirely sure I can now. If you don't have the living, you're now better placed under common tenure than you were, aren't you?
Mm.
But benefices still get suspended. And one of the things we're
Indeed.
looking at with the new
Mm.
mission and pastoral measure is maximum length of suspensions.
I mean,
You probably better
practically,
say
it
more.
doesn't make a lot of difference. I'll answer my own question. The two things are the reasons we suspend livings are over selling the parsonage. If you're the incumbent, you still legally own the parsonage house.
Yes.
When I was on synod, that was one of the things we were looking at changing.
The Benfield Amendment.
Indeed, and if we, from the diocesan end, want to sell the parsonage house with the least problems, actually asking for a suspension on that grounds, putting a priest in charge in, then you can do that while you're renting something else, and then the next one can come in. We do try and lift the suspensions as soon as you've got the new house, So it takes one person out. The other thing is to do with the legal ownership of the building. That aspect of freehold is still there. And this will crop up at the moment. We've got one where there's a parish with two church buildings. One of them is no longer in regular use and has got squatters in it. Who may sign to the eviction order? So that's one of the few places. Mostly practically it doesn't make any difference, but that's one where it does make a difference. Well, thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
That brief introduction to it. Anybody who's thinking of being ordained will also want to look at guidelines to the professional conduct of the clergy, which I think in many ways was written by clergy to fill out some of those blanks in what is a very thin job description, and yet in practice enables an immense amount of mission and ministry. So we'll stop the recording there, and then other people other than me can ask questions which you may or may not be able to answer. Thank you.